Imagine a piece of old cloth. At first glance, it looks like nothing special, just a linen sheet, worn, yellowed with age and scarred by centuries of handling. But when you step closer, you notice something extraordinary. A faint image, almost ghost-like, emerges from the fabric. It's the front and back of a man's body, stretched across the length of the cloth. A man who appears to have been whipped, crowned with thorns, nailed through his wrists and feet, and pierced in his side. This cloth is known as the Shroud of Turin, and for hundreds of years it has sparked one of the greatest debates in history. Is this truly the burial shroud of Jesus Christ, or is it simply the most convincing forgery ever made? The shroud first entered the public record in the 14th century in Lire, France. A French knight named Geoffroy de Charny displayed it in a small church, and crowds flocked to see it. People were shocked. This was not just a relic, but a relic with a haunting image. Immediately, devotion and controversy surrounded it. Some church officials doubted its authenticity right from the start. The Bishop of Troyes called it a clever forgery. But ordinary people, farmers, pilgrims, mothers, soldiers, saw in it the very face of Christ, and that belief spread quickly. By the 16th century, the shroud was transferred to Turin, Italy, where it has remained ever since. But its journey was not smooth. It survived multiple fires, including a devastating blaze in 1532 that nearly destroyed it. The silver reliquary holding the shroud melted in the intense heat, dripping molten silver onto the folded cloth. The result was scorch marks and holes that can still be seen today. Nuns carefully repaired it with patches, saving the relic. But here's where things get strange. The image on the shroud isn't like normal art. Scientists who examined it in the modern era found no paint, no dye, no pigment. There are no brush strokes. Instead, the image appears to be a discoloration on the very top fibers of the linen. It doesn't sink into the threads, and it doesn't behave like ink or paint. It's almost as if the image was burned into the cloth, yet with no fire. Even more puzzling, the image is a photographic negative. When the Italian photographer Secondo Pia took the first photographs of the shroud in 1898, he nearly dropped his camera in shock. On the negative plate, the faint, unclear image suddenly appeared in astonishing detail. The face of the man was clear, lifelike, and haunting. This discovery set off a wave of renewed interest and scientific inquiry. The physical wounds on the image tell a story. The man has bloodstains on his forehead, as if from a crown of thorns. Long streaks down his back suggest scourging with a Roman whip. There are wounds in the wrists, not the palms, from nails, blood stains on the feet, and a wound on the right side of the chest consistent with a spear thrust. All these match the biblical description of Jesus' crucifixion. For many believers, this was overwhelming evidence. For skeptics, it was too good to be true. In 1978, a team of over 30 scientists called the Shroud of Turin Research Project, STURP for short, were granted access to the cloth for 5 days of intense testing. They brought with them cameras, microscopes, chemical kits, and cutting-edge tools. After hundreds of hours of study, they issued their report. Their conclusion shocked everyone. The image is not the product of painting. It is not a stain, not a scorch, not a photograph. We cannot explain how it was made. Think about that. 30 scientists, many of them skeptics, went in expecting to expose a medieval fraud. Instead, they left baffled. But science didn't stop there. Blood tests were performed on the reddish stains across the shroud. The results showed real human blood, type AB. Even more curious, the blood contained high levels of bilirubin, consistent with severe trauma and torture before death. It wasn't just paint, it was blood. Then came one of the most controversial studies, radiocarbon dating. In 1988, 3 laboratories in Oxford, Zurich, and Arizona tested samples of the shroud. Their result, the linen dated between 1260 and 1390 AD. In other words, the shroud was a medieval artifact. Not ancient, not from the time of Christ. Skeptics claimed victory. Case closed, it was a fake. But the story didn't end there. Critics of the carbon dating pointed out problems. The samples taken may have been from a corner of the shroud that had been repaired after the fire of 1532. That section might not represent the original cloth. Other experts argued that centuries of smoke, contamination, and handling could have skewed the results. To this day, the carbon dating remains a source of heated debate. Other discoveries deepened the mystery. When scientists studied the image using advanced imaging technology, they found something incredible. The shroud contains 3D information. The brightness of the image corresponds to distance, almost like a topographical map of the body. No medieval artist could have faked such data, especially hundreds of years before photography or 3D imaging existed. Some researchers proposed unusual theories. One suggested that the image was formed by a burst of radiant energy, perhaps even light itself. Others speculated it was a kind of medieval protophotograph, made using chemicals and sunlight. But no experiment has been able to fully replicate the shroud's unique characteristics. Beyond science, the shroud has had an enormous cultural and religious impact. Every time it has been put on public display, millions have traveled to Turin to see it. In the year 2000, more than 2 million people visited during its exhibition. Popes have spoken about it with reverence, calling it a mirror of the gospel. Even Pope John Paul II said, "The shroud is an image of human suffering, but also a sign of hope." Skeptics, however, remain firm. They argue that faith should not rest on objects. They point out that relics throughout history, bones, crosses, nails, have often been forged. To them, the shroud is simply the most convincing example of a medieval creation. And yet, the mystery remains. If it is a forgery, it is one that no one has been able to reproduce, even with modern technology. If it is authentic, then it is perhaps the most important artifact in human history. Think about this. A piece of linen, 14 feet long and 3.5 feet wide, carrying an image no one can explain. An image that looks like a man who suffered the same fate described in the Gospels. An image that inspires faith in millions, while provoking endless debate among scientists. Is it truly the burial cloth of Jesus Christ? Or is it simply one of the world's greatest unsolved mysteries? Perhaps we will never know for certain. But one thing is clear. The Shroud of Turin is not just a piece of fabric. It is a riddle stitched into history. A question that refuses to be answered. And maybe, just maybe, that is its true purpose.